Okay, welcome, contemporary art class. You guys are right at the tip of the spear on this. What I mean by that, of course, is that since your class is coming up Monday, you're going to be the first class to be exposed to this experiment that we call moving 4,000 classes online. I've worked a lot with the audio, I've worked a lot with the lighting, and with the screen capture. And we haven't worked out all the bugs yet, as will become abundantly obvious as you start to watch this video. So I apologize. You're definitely going to hear traffic in the background. You're going to hear a dog barking. You're going to see some problems. You'll probably hear me slurping my Coke. Almost certainly, inadvertently, I will change out of full screen mode and allow you to see my search history, which will be shockingly full of otters. And maybe that will be potential future blackmail opportunities for you. But it is what it is. It's very difficult. It's very different than standing up in front of a class. I realized I've had to adjust some of the lectures. So these lectures will be a little bit different than what's in the PDF format online already. I often update them, but I will update them as I get them up. So a brief word or two of how this is going to work. I may at times have a picture-in-picture so I can talk to you in person, so you can see the fantastic lighting I now have in my home or office studio. But I think most of it is going to be just me talking over the lectures. It's just going to be me talking over images, which gets a little tedious, it gets a little boring. So I realized I needed more visuals. So I've added some extra slides that, again, aren't in the PDF, but I will update those PDFs. The way this is going to work is I will create a discussion page online on the Canvas site, and then you will be able to go to that discussion page, and there will be links. And yes, that's links plural, because I can't do a lecture in a single hour block. Even though I can lecture in front of you standing up for an hour, it's a little bit different doing it here at a desk in front of a mic and in front of a blank screen. So, and also there is the question of upload times. So these things will be broken up into several smaller videos. So this is the postmodern lecture, and the postmodern lecture will actually be broken up into 3 20-minute chunks. And hopefully that will, well, maybe a little more than 20 minutes. Hopefully that'll be a little easier to download. So these will be uploaded to YouTube. The YouTube comments will be disabled. But if you wish to make comments, please make the comments in the discussion that the links are posted in on Canvas. Hopefully, I know this is kind of impossible to see when all you're seeing is text on a screen, but hopefully when you go to the discussion, you see this posted online, it will all make sense. If there are any questions, if anybody wants to comment on the lecture, and if you want to comment either on the technical issues, how it's working, how it's sounding, or if you want to comment on the content of the lecture, please do it in the discussion page that was opened for the links for that lecture. I think that's the best place to do it. Also some updates. We'll talk more about presentations. I hope to do a whole video about how we're going to do presentations. Presentations will also be handled in discussion pages. Please make your presentations in a format that can be linked into a discussion, and I will create a discussion for each day's presenters themed around a topic, and I'll do that and I'll provide that on Canvas. So you have to upload a link to your Prezi or your PowerPoint or your Google presentations or your Keynote, however you want to do it. And if you wish to provide audio with that and do a voiceover, you may do that, much as I'm doing here. So the next couple of weeks are going to be really rough and tumble. Buckle up, it's going to be a bumpy ride. But as long as we stay communicating with each other, I think it's going to be fine. So I will advise you more as we get to the presentations, but again, I know this is sound really rambling and rough, but it's just the way it's going to be. As I get a little bit more technically savvy, as my learning curve, flattens out a little bit, I will actually hopefully get some little bit more bells and whistles to this, and it won't be so dry. Okay, enough of the throat clearing. Let me just try to imagine I'm in class. Okay, I can see some of you falling asleep already. All right, I'm good to go. All right, so let's talk about postmodernism. So Postmodernism is a major movement in art and architecture, particularly from the 70s onward, late 70s, 80s, and 90s, especially in art and architecture. As a movement, though, it actually has its origins going all the way back to the 1950s and the 1960s. So this is why I have this new slide. Talk about the roots of postmodernism. So postmodernism is really an outgrowth of post-structuralism. And post-structuralism was a continental philosophy. It was mostly French philosophers, but there were other German philosophers as well. The two big names are up there on the screen for you, Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault. And really this was a kind of an extension of critical theory. It was the logical extension of critical theory. Structuralism was a philosophy that was a late modernist philosophy, and it espoused much of the features of modernism. The main feature of post-structuralism, as I've said before, anytime you put the word post in front of something, it means we really don't have a solid definition of it. Anytime something is post something, it is defined not by what it is, but in opposition to what came before it, in opposition to what it is not. And that's one of the big facets of postmodernism, is it's a repudiation of the major tenets of modernism. So what are the major tenets of modernism? Well, modernism was a philosophy of positivism, of empiricism and objectivity. It was the method of this, it was the scientific method. It was this idea or this belief that you could, through facts and reasonable argument, by experimentation, hypothesis, theory, all of that, you could come to an understanding of this thing we call truth. And that you could be objective, that there was an objective truth that could be known. How this impacted art is that art was, in the modernist period, a pursuit of truth. And you can see this in the works of the abstract expressionists. A Jackson Pollock painting, a Rothko painting, is nothing but paint. It isn't an attempt at illusion. It is an attempt to create a pure objective reality. That pure objective reality is the experience of looking at the surface of a painting, of experiencing paint on canvas. That isn't trying to tell a story, isn't trying to narrate anything, it just is. And so modernism in art is a natural outgrowth of modernism as a philosophy, of creating something that was pure and objective. But beginning in the 1950s and the 1960s, a group of scholars and philosophers begin to question the whole nature of modernism. And you start this with the post-structuralists. And the big post-structuralists are Derrida and Foucault. And Derrida and Foucault decide that you really can't come to an objective knowledge of the truth. You can't come to understand reality. And the reason why is because they put an enormous amount of emphasis on language and perception. That is, these were philosophers, these were thinkers, and philosophers and thinkers and academics, they transmit ideas through writing, through speaking. And so they believed that writing and speaking were the only way that you could really express thinking. And so they confused thinking with writing and speaking, with the tools of language. Now that's in itself is a major flaw, as any artist knows, as any mathematician or dancer knows. There are many, many ways to think, spatially, in motion, in your body, and mathematically. There's lots of different ways to think than just language. But remember, these are French philosophers, and they're mostly in fields like literature, comparative literature, philology, things associated with language. So for them, language is thinking, and that's the source of the whole problem. Because language is inherently fungible. Language changes over time. A word that was innocent can over time change to mean something completely different, have a different connotation. Language is flexible, and that flexibility proves that language is inherently problematic. Okay? At least that's the theory in postmodernism, that language is inherently problematic, and language forces a certain perception. And if you change that language changes the perception. So if a word changes its idea, then that word changes your whole concept. And so since the universe has to be understood through language, which again is a kind of error of post-structuralism, and language is inherently changeable and fungible, it can be malleable and changed to whatever it is, then there is no way to get to objective reality. Everything is pure perception. Everything is just a reflection of what the language. And so the major tool of postmodernism then becomes deconstruction. That is, becomes the deconstruction of language and the deconstruction of our perception. And that's not inherently a bad thing in itself. In this way, I think that postmodernism actually is very useful, and destruction is a very useful tool. Deconstruction means that you break something apart. You challenge your assumptions. And the truth is, in the 1950s and 60s, there were plenty of assumptions that needed to be challenged. They were very much interested in how language reinforced systems of power. So that's how this is an extension of critical theory. This is the cultural industry that we talked about by Theodor Adorno, that you have this kind of pervading set of assumptions that serve the interests of the privileged, of the elite, which generally tended to be white, male, wealthy people in the West. And so you had to challenge those ideas. You had to break down those ideas to prove that they weren't objective, that they were only under the assumption of objectivity, that they were in fact very subjective and very self-serving. So deconstruction is very useful. It's just like a sledgehammer. And if you have a wall you need to break down, a sledgehammer is exactly the tool you need, and you can bust it up and prove that it's not what you think it is. The problem comes when you start to believe, well, at least, let me put this another way. The problem comes when you then have to build something up. Deconstruction is very excellent for breaking things down. It's much harder to build things back up. And if you don't believe that there is some fundamental truth at the base of all this language, if language is inherently flexible, then what can you build up? It's like a world built on jello. And this is one of the criticisms of postmodernism. When you read Derrida, Derrida is just a word salad. He just generates neologisms and jargon, and most people can't understand what he said. In fact, Foucault accused him of being an obscuritan terrorist, and what he meant by that was that Derrida would put through this very dense prose, and then when people said, yeah, I don't know what you mean, then he would just accuse you of being dumb. He would just accuse you of being too stupid to get his point. Or if you said, okay, well, wait a minute, do you mean this? He could just say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. You misunderstood. And that's one of the problems with postmodernism. If you believe everything is language, then one of the goals comes to be to manipulate language. And in fact, postmodernists are very honest about this, that you use language to manipulate or to distort reality. That is, and you do it intentionally, and you do it without, any kind of qualms, because everybody does it. Every society manipulates language to their advantage, and so as a political goal, postmodernists said the goal was not to change reality. The goal was to change language and there achieve certain political aims or certain political goals. You change the language, you change the culture. And I think a lot of that is true. It does affect perceptions. But at the end of the day, no, there really is a reality at the base of this. It isn't just turtles all the way down. It is, in fact, there is a kind of solid reality. One of my favorite ways that this was demonstrated is when Derrida died in 2004. Somebody wrote an obituary about him. And one of the common phrases that Derrida was famous for in his writing is he would say something like, he said, well, this is, the truth, if the truth can be said to mean anything. Or he would say, oh, well, this is reality, if reality can be said to mean anything. And what he meant by that is the words seem to have meaning, but they don't really. They just have the meaning we give to them. So somebody took that very famous phrase of his and they applied it to him in his obituary. And in his obituary they said, Jacques Derrida died today, if in fact death can be said to mean anything, which is just perfect. It's just hilarious because he really is dead. Death is a reality. It happens to all of us. There is a certain truth to death, to humanity, to life. There is certain truth to science. We can prove this. And so to use that line when he died was a way of saying, yeah, Derrida, you're kind of a schmuck. There really is a truth and a reality out there. But for the postmodernists, they really stress this lack of objective truth. And the outshaking of this, the thing that shakes out of this is that this means that all truths are relative. All societies, all cultures are relative. Moral relativism becomes the rule. You can't judge that society. You've created a whole series of constructs in your society to justify genocide, colonialism, patriarchy, whatever it is. And so if you look at another society and you see their practices, you can't judge that either. You have to try to recognize the subjectiveness in your own society as well, which I think is actually very useful. As a non-Western specialist, I really appreciate that. It allows us to take a step back. But at the end, you can take it too far. So I really do believe, and this is getting a little personal and political, that as a moral philosophy, as a political philosophy, postmodernism has its limits and runs up into some pretty strong brick walls that can't be deconstructed. The reality of human life, for example, and death being one of them. But who cares? Because we don't care about postmodernism as to how it relates to philosophy. What we care about is how does it relate to art. So what happened as this started to enter the world of art? And what it does is it creates an art that doesn't believe in any moral truth or any absolutes. And so postmodernism in art is going to use a lot of the ideas of modernism and of the past, but it's never going to do it in a sincere or earnest way. It's always going to do it in a knowing way, in an ironic way. Sometimes postmodernism lapses into farce or parody. Sometimes it's just an expression of fun or irony. It's not going to take itself too seriously. In fact, it deconstructs everything. And so that's going to be the same role in art history. It's going to attempt to deconstruct things. One of the first places that postmodernism actually shows up is kind of strange when you think about it at first, but then the more you think about it, the more it makes sense, and that's in architecture. And I think the reason that makes sense is because in modern architecture, modernism really hit hard, and it went deep. Architecture was one of the fields in art history in the 20th century and mid-20th century that fully embraced modernism. So we have buildings like this. This is one of the preeminent modernist buildings of the middle of the 20th century. This is the Philip Johnson House. This is a house he built for himself in New Canaan, Connecticut. It's probably one of the best expressions of modernist ideals we've ever seen. It has no decoration. It has no quotation of the past, no column capitals, no arches, no nothing like that. It has a flat roof. It doesn't even have gables. The walls are pure glass. There's this breakdown between the interior and the exterior. It's utterly minimalist. It has nothing that is not absolutely needed. And it is this pure expression of what Corbusier called a machine for living. A house is a machine for living. It's this pure expression of form follows function. It just is an enclosed space to keep you out of the weather. And then everything else is just this completely open plan. Really remarkable. Well, what's shocking is that just 30 years after this, Philip Johnson, who was one of these premier modernists, creates this. This is the AT&T building. It's now called the Sony building because it was bought out by Sony. And it couldn't be more different than modernism if you try. It's just bizarre. It was built to be a corporate headquarters. And it has some features of modernism. I mean, it has this kind of grid alignment of windows going all the way back to the first skyscrapers we saw under Louis Sullivan in the Chicago School. But look at that top. And here I'm just going to grab a pen to highlight this. But just look at that top. That top is completely superfluous. That is a broken pediment. And a broken pediment is this feature of architecture that goes all the way back to Georgian architecture. Actually, even goes back even further to Greco-Roman architecture and Baroque architecture. But this expression of it is a kind of William Gibbsian architecture. There's no reason for a skyscraper to have a broken pediment. It's absurd. It's a purely decorative function. It didn't even have a reason to exist in Georgian or Baroque or other architecture either. It's a purely neo-Baroque kind of element. And the inspiration for this was actually things like Chippendale furniture, like a Chippendale highboy that we see here. So the whole thing was reimagined like a piece of furniture. That's just crazy. It's just crazy that one of the premier architects of the modernist period would redesign a building and design a building to embody pure formal elements that have no purpose. And it's not just the top. The bottom of the building is equally problematic. So take a look at the bottom of this building. And here you can see that wonderful broken pediment up at the top again. Here's that broken pediment up at the top. But then look at the bottom here. It's like a church. It looks like a basilica. It has a central aisle and it has side aisles. I think you can see it a little better here. I mean, it is. It even has a rose window. Can you believe it? This is architecture entirely borrowed from the religious architecture, formalist architecture. When we go to the interior, it even had a statue on one end. The statue is this kind of spirit of telecommunications. He's holding a lightning coming out of a cord on one side. It's this winged figure. But when we look at the interior of the building, it has semicircular arches. It has column capitals. It has Romanesque features. It has ashlar masonry. What is going on? And none of these things quite fit with each other. If we go back, for example, what on earth does a Christian basilica, a kind of Romanesque basilica, have to do with Gibbsian broken pediments? It has nothing to do with it. It has absolutely nothing. So there are quotations of various parts of art history here, but they're all mixed together. And this is a character of postmodernism. Postmodernism is by its very nature ironic or pastiche. It, unlike a revival or a reactionary movement, where we have various pieces coming together and the person is earnestly trying to recreate the spirit of the past, maybe with a new interpretation, or maybe some kind of new spin. This isn't. This is quoting the past, but not to any particular effect. And so what you'll see is that there are no rules. And that makes sense for a philosophy that deconstructs everything. There's no rules as to how you quote things. You want to mix Gibbsian Georgian architecture with early Christian or Romanesque architecture? Do it. Nobody cares. It's whatever you need to do to make your effect. And it's utterly pastiche. Another great place we can see this is in the works of Komar and Melamed. Komar and Melamed are a couple of artists that lived in the former Soviet bloc, and so they grew up under that and came to the United States. And so we see them doing their interpretation of this same kind of postmodernism by mixing art styles in a very fun and playful way. This is their piece called The Origins of Socialist Realism. So what is socialist realism? Well, socialist realism was this art style that existed under Stalin. So we have the figure of Stalin here. Stalin, of course, was the dictator of the Soviet Union from the 1920s right up into the 1953 when he died. And under his rule, there was only one official art style, and that official art style was called socialist realism. This was an art style that was only, we've seen some of this before in class, it praised the leader, it praised Stalin, it praised the industrial and military might of the Soviet Empire. It could be vaguely neo-impressionist or realistic. It sometimes had Art Deco motifs, but it had to be realistic. It had to be recognizable things. So the whole world was going abstract. or going surrealist, they were in this very realist mode. And it was art of the state. It served the interest of the state entirely. And so here's an example that this lower picture with these children giving roses to the great leader Stalin. It's really kind of funny. So Komar and Melamed reinterpreted this, and what they did is they drop in this neo-Baroque background. I mean, look at this background with its single light source, its massive columns, its, sweeping, drapery. It has this semi-draped nude figure who's lightly puts her hand under the chin of Joseph Stalin while she reaches around the other side to trace his outline. This is a parody of so many things. This is a parody of, say, the works of Gentileschi, the works of Georges de Latour, who used this deep tenebrism and lighting effects, all of this Baroque architecture, but all in the service of preserving the image and the silhouette. Because, of course, all socialist realism was in service to the state, and in the Soviet Union, the state was Stalin. And so here he is, his silhouette is being forever, embedded on art. And this is hilarious because this is, of course, a parody of Pliny's story of the origins of art. Pliny the Elder wrote a story about how did art get started, and according to legend, it starts because a Greek shepherd sees his shadow on the ground and he uses his staff to trace his silhouette. And this is the origin of art. In fact, the Greek word for drawing is literally skiagraphia, which is shadow drawing or shadow tracing. And so here we have this absurd kind of thing. But it's a great example of what postmodern is. It deals in absurdity, it deals in deconstruction. And so this deconstructs the art of the Soviet Union, but it also deconstructs Western art canon as well. It kind of makes fun of the weightiness, the epic weightiness or pretentiousness of Baroque art. And so postmodernism is all about, it uses a lot of humor, it uses a lot of irony, and it does this to great effect. Komar and Melamed did a lot of art projects together as this kind of team, and one of my favorite examples is the next one. This is the Most and Least Wanted Paintings. And this one is a wonderful example of the deconstruction of art and of public tastes in art. So to explain this, I have to back up and explain how they did this. So Komar and Melamed decided that, well, is art supposed to be something that is popularly liked, or is it something for elites? There had been growing in the United States ever since the modernist movement, and not just the United States, the whole world, a debate about what is the nature of art. Does it serve the masses or does it serve the elites? This is the root of Clement Greenberg's Avant-Garde and Kitsch, this famous article he wrote in 1939, where he said any art that advances the aesthetic appreciation is going to be art of the avant-garde. Only the avant-garde can be trusted for true aesthetics. Everything else, even academic art, is going to be kitsch. That's going to be low art. It's art that ratifies conventions and basically fulfills expectations. That to make good art, to make good aesthetic art, you have to challenge expectations. So this whole series of paintings that they did challenges that whole idea, because they decided, well, let's just leave it up to people. And so what they did is they made a survey. It's fabulous. You make a survey. And in this survey, they gave people options of saying what they liked and what they didn't like in art, what they appreciated, what they didn't. Did they like landscapes? Did they like people? Did they like political themes, historical themes, patriotic themes, etc.? And they distributed this survey across several nations. And so from this survey, they extrapolated a series of styles and themes that were A, the most beloved of that nation, and B, the least beloved, the things that people liked the most and the things that people liked the least. And then they took all of these attributes that people liked the most, and then they put them together in one painting. And then they did the same for the paintings that they liked the least. They took all the paintings that they liked the least, and they put them together into one painting. So this is the most and least wanted paintings for the United States. Let's start with the most wanted painting first. So here you have the most wanted painting. It's a landscape. It has this beautiful pastoral view. It has people, naturalistic people. It has animals and nature. But the thing that really makes this American, that cracks me up the most, is that it has the father of our country, George Washington, right there. Isn't that funny? That Americans are really into their heritage, so this is the quality that they like. Now, take a look at the least, desired painting. So the least desired painting is this. It has no people, it has no landscapes, it has no historical reference, it's purely abstract. And so this is these two artists deconstructing the nature of taste in modern contemporary art. Basically saying that, demonstrating this wide divide between the masses and the elites, but also demonstrating, hey, it's like, if art is a matter of public taste, let's just do it. Let's just demonstrate it. It's very fun. Here's another one. This one is the most elite paintings, but this is the one for France. And you notice that France has something in common with America. We notice that we have, let's go back here a second. Again, we're still a little bit rough here. I'm not sure why the pen takes so much time. Notice we have landscape, we have animals, we have the tree, almost identical. But now we have haystacks. And why do we have haystacks? Because haystacks are, of course, associated with Impressionism, Monet, Pissarro. They all painted haystacks. So this is kind of French pastoralism. We still have people, but they're different people. They look a little different, and we have different animals. We do have still the deer, but we also have grazing animals. This is the least wanted painting in France, which is fascinating to me because in America it's geometric abstraction, but the least wanted painting in France is more strict geometric abstraction. So I guess they're not fans of Mondrian or the Constructivists or Kazimir Malevich. It's really funny. So this gives you a taste of what postmodernism is like, what postmodernism is attempting to do. It is this attempt to completely deconstruct our understanding of art. And it does it in a very fun and whimsical way. It does it in a way that makes fun of the nature of art itself. It's going to be very pastiche. It's basically making no moral judgments. Not anything, one thing is better than the other. It's going to be, again, really just about recontextualization, reinterpretation. Okay, let me move on. One of the premier postmodernists was going to be Sherry Levine. And Sherry Levine really pushed the boundaries of the nature of reality and images. So art, again, at least under the modernists, and from before that, one of the defining characteristics of art was originality. That you had to be this original thinker, this innovator, who created new ideas and new concepts, new ways of creating and new ways of moving forward. And postmodernism is all about quotation. Postmodernism is all about deconstructing the past and deconstructing modernism and deconstructing the nature of originality. We can see that very clearly in the works of, Komar and Melamed, that it's deconstructing. You can see it in the works of Philip Johnson in the AT&T building. This is very much the past, but it's a kind of a strange funhouse mirror being held up to the past. Kind of pointing out people's foibles and people's concepts, what they like or what they dislike. No one pushed that further, I think, than Sherry Levine. So Sherry Levine was a photographer, and she submitted this photo. Okay, now this photo, if you're familiar with social realist photographers of the 1930s, the Depression era, is a photograph by Walker Evans. Walker Evans was a photographer who went out and photographed migrant workers in the Dust Bowl era, was very influential on bringing to light and bringing to people's awareness the plight of the migrant workers in the Depression era in the Dust Bowl. And he shot a very famous photograph, this photograph, in fact, of a migrant worker. And this became one of his hallmark images. So what Sherry Levine did is she went up to the Walker Evans photograph. She set up her tripod and she took a photo of Walker Evans' photograph. So this is a photograph of Walker Evans' photograph. Now here you have to know a little bit about copyright law. Under American copyright law, the person who owns the photograph is the person who took the photograph. Okay, so it's very fascinating that I'll just tell you a kind of strange story about this, that if you're trying to get a photograph of a very famous painting out of a collection for a publication, you have to ask that museum to photograph it for you. And the paintings themselves, the images themselves are long outside of copyright law. They're in the public domain. But the photographs of those images are not. Now, most museums have realized, well, we'll just photograph it and we'll make the photographs available online because the image is no longer under copyright. It's in public domain. But the Getty Museum is a really nasty place. And I'm just sorry, it is. And what the Getty Museum does is that they will not let you photograph. They do not let photographs go loose. So what they do is they have an in-house photographer who works under contract for the Getty, and everything he photographs, their copyrights transfer to the Getty. So he will shoot a photograph for it, and you will pay. And so this is a loophole. So the image is in the public domain, but the photograph is owned by the Getty. So you have to pay for the right of the photograph. It's a bizarre loophole that essentially transfers ownership of the image from the original creator, even though it's long been in the public domain, and transfers it to the photographer or to the institution so they can charge you for it, because they couldn't charge you for the actual image because it's in the public domain. It's crazy. Copyright law works this way. So here's what Sherry Levine does. She photographs a Walker Evans. She photographs a photograph. And by photographing a photograph, this is no longer a Walker Evans photograph. It is a Sherry Levine photograph. Now that's absurd because the way she photographed, it's not like, if we'd had some of the gallery in there, if we'd had somebody standing in front of it admiring it, then we'd say, okay, this is Sherry Levine's contribution or interpretation of Walker Evans. But that's not what she did. She photographed it so precisely that it's identical in every respect to the original photograph. But because she shot it as a photograph, it's hers, it's her image. And she puts this up in a gallery. You can just imagine the uproar this caused. That she essentially just stole a Walker Evans. And because of the copyright laws, because of the way photographs work, she's totally allowed to do this. It's actually kind of brilliant. Excuse me, turning head to cough. Yes, I did cough into my elbow. Okay, so this is brilliant. I love this. Of course, it's extraordinarily cheeky, and it deals with issues of originality, of fraud, and as far as it caused an uproar. In many ways, this is kind of the counterpoint to the erased de Kooning by Rauschenberg. Rauschenberg took a famous work of art and killed it, got rid of it. Sherry Levine came along and took a famous work of art and photographed it and made it hers and displayed it in galleries. She did this to a lot of famous photographers, not just Walker Evans. And she's been doing this ever since, that, she's been taking and appropriating objects from art history, from the history of art history, and reinterpreting them. So here she has a brass reproduction of the very famous fountain by Marcel Duchamp. So think about this. This is, again, a commentary on the nature of originality. What's originality? That modernism put this enormous emphasis on originality, that originality was the source of this innovation, of the artistic spark, the artistic genius. And so it became this never-ending hunt for novelty. And here comes along deconstruction, postmodernism, and it deconstructs that and says, you're full of crap, which is not a pun based on this item here. It's just, sorry, dad humor comes out of me naturally. I'm sorry about it. I have 3 kids, I can't help it. But it's full of crap, even though this is urinal. That's really nonsense. That's not the case at all. That originality has always been overrated. Everything is some kind of quotation of the past. This endless hunt for novelty is absurd. And so here we have her making after Marcel Duchamp, but it's redone in brass. And so this is very similar to pop art in a way. It's very similar to the beer cans, the Ballantine Ale beer cans by Jasper Johns, that she takes something that was originally, at least we believe so, a ceramic urinal bought from a standard plumbing supply by Marcel Duchamp and a couple of his friends, and then recasts it in brass. Again, brass is a durable material. A high prestige material indicates permanence or something of that nature. To comment on it, to comment on the absurdity. And of course, Marcel Duchamp was one of the first to actually deconstruct art by taking a urinal and putting on its side and demanding it be part of this show, all while covered by the alias Armut, and also serving on the board of the Society of Independent Artists and writing this defense of Armut when he is Armut. So it's an apt thing for a postmodernist to tackle. We see this kind of deconstruction in everything. Here's another one. This is, again, another famous Walker Evans photograph, and she's just photographed it exactly as it was, so that it's indistinguishable from the original Walker Evans photograph. You see these same kind of things in works. Here's Richard Prince. So what Richard Prince would do is Richard Prince would take these photos, and again, he'd often take these photos from stock images of photos, that he was kind of amazed at how images of women in catalogs and magazines all had these very obvious, stereotypical, hack, cliche ways of representing women. And so he just forces them, he puts them all together, puts the prints together, and again, these are photographs of photographs, to let you say, hey, take a look at this. He even does this whole series. This is Bitches and Bastards. This is something he did in 1985-86. And what we're seeing here are a collection of photographs again. So again, using this idea of copying the thing. But in this case, he's copying band photos. And he copied band photos of all of these glamour rock bands, these glam metal bands out of the 80s. Okay, so here I have to back up a little for some of you millennial noobs. Once upon a time, there was this thing called heavy metal. Metal died in the 90s, it's just true. It got replaced with rap as the authentic music of teenage rebellion. But when I was a lad, heavy metal was the music of teenage rebellion. You wanted to piss your mom off, you go in and bought a Rat album, or you went and bought Quiet Riot or Motley Crue or AC/DC. They were convinced all of these bands were absolutely satanic, and they weren't. It was all just a farce. It was all just, to sell records. It was all just, fun. Unlike, I think that's why people went to rap, is that teenagers looked at rap, and rap, even gangster rap, as violent as it was. I mean, Biggie Smalls and Tupac and all the rest of them, they really were as violent as they claimed to be. So there was a certain authenticity and honesty to rap, whereas metal was always kind of fake. And you can tell, and glam metal was the fakest of all the metals. And so in glam metal, the guys, I think Poison was the worst. Is Poison in here? I think this is Poison down here in this bottom corner right here. I can't tell for sure. They're a little small. But they would have these outrageous hairdos, long hair, lipstick, makeup. They were glammed out. It's strange because these guys were seen as alpha males, as womanizers, and as very sexualized males. And yet, this was really a lot of crossover territory with cross-dressing and drag queens. It's really kind of funny. The 80s were crazy. So they had this enormous hair, etc. And so that's why he titles this Bitches and Bastards, because these are all guys. There's no women here, and yet they had this strange, bizarre, feminist, agendered aspect that was being created as well. And he really thought this was fun. So that what he was saying is, okay, so here's these images of teenage youthful rebellion that was being put out there by these heavy metal bands, by these glam rock bands, and it was all fake. It was all totally put on. And I love how he puts them all together in this grid so you can see just how unoriginal, how similar they all were. So again, postmodernism, deconstruction. In this case, he's using art to deconstruct heavy metal bands and glam rock bands to show that it is, even the glam metal band is a pastiche. It's a phony image. So you have all collections of these. Oh yeah, the bear shirts, the open vests, the bird-chested gigantic hair and lipstick is really crazy. There's all kinds of artists who are working in this same vein. Gilbert and George, this famous team of British artists that were put together stained glass windows, again, appropriating images, deconstructing things. Gilbert and George actually made outfits for themselves where they sold the outfits to sponsors. So if you've ever seen NASCAR, you know that these NASCAR vehicles are completely covered with patches from all their sponsors, whether it's, gasoline companies or cigarettes or whoever. And so these guys, as part of their displays, would, sell off the real estate on the suits they were wearing. They got a couple of bespoke, custom-made suits from Savile Row in London, high-end suits, and then they sold pieces of it in patches to various companies. They fully embraced commerciality, etc. So postmodernism is this kind of growth of pop art in that way. And you can see this, that it's very 80s, bright, livid color, but isn't supposed to be taken seriously. This is the very famous Gilbert and George, although I can't quite remember who's Gilbert and who's George. I think this is Gilbert, this is George. You can see their faces become part of the icons of this. Another artist who did this was Yasumasu Morimura. Morimura would do the same thing. And of course, again, complete deconstruction. In this case, he would deconstruct these great pieces of the Western art canon. This is, of course, Olympia. He's deconstructing. He would make photographs of himself. And again, the play here is dealing with gender and crossing gender, etc. He would take on these famous artists. I love how he's Japanese, and so he would work his own culture into these. So in Manet's Olympia, there's of course the screeching cat here, but he's taken a neko cat, a good luck symbol from Japanese culture, and put it in there. And he has, interestingly enough, given himself blonde hair instead of black, because of course black hair is native to Japanese, and so I think he's changed the identity. He's played a lot with, this is him too, he's in both places, playing with identity, playing with what does identity mean, and then mixing it. I love how the print here is a Japanese print. So he's working his own culture. He's deconstructing Western culture at the same time he's deconstructing his own culture. He's writing his own culture and his own agender identity into these pictures. Here's a very famous one. This is a parody of a photograph by, I've lost it. I think it's Irving Penn, who photographed, of course, Audrey Hepburn. But instead, he has made himself up to look like Audrey Hepburn too, completely. Somebody's going to correct me that. Some photography student in the class is going to correct me and say it's not Irving Penn. I always default to Irving Penn because he's my favorite. But it's probably somebody else. But neither here nor there. It gives you a sense of it. And, of course, this is his very famous deconstruction of... again, Manet, this is Bar at the Folies Bergère, where he has inserted himself into the painting, and of course then he plays on these sexual terms. He does a series of these, and in this one you can actually see that he created false arms so that when he had a dress it would connect to make this. But in this case he decided he liked it better with the dress off, and so you can see his natural skin color as opposed to the artificial skin color. Again, playing on issues of race, playing on issues of gender, the conveniently placed vase of flowers, all the rest of this. Deconstructing the past. Here's his deconstruction of Frida Kahlo. So here he is dressed up like Frida Kahlo, again using Frida Kahlo's eyebrows, which you can see, and also her imagery to recreate this. It's very fun stuff. Deconstruction historically of the past. Another example, probably my favorite postmodernist in this regard, is Mark Tansey. So Mark Tansey was this postmodernist artist that was right there at the same time, and he has a method that is very interesting. He doesn't call his studio a studio, he calls it an archive. He was actually the child of two art historians, so that's how you know how messed up he is. And he would collect nostalgic photographs, postcards, old historical memorabilia, ephemera of all kinds, and he would put it in massive files in his library. And then he would take these out and he would create these into collages. But these collages were not the final work, they were just the intermediate step. And then he would use these collages as the basis for creating these realistic paintings. Now, the paintings are always done in a monochromatic style, I think, to demonstrate that these aren't real, that these are, they have the same kind of quality as black and white archival photographs. And he always takes on these ideas of art, and especially art history and art history theory. He loves Clement Greenberg and dismantles him all the time. This one is called the innocent eye test, and of course, this comes from a term in art history and art criticism where, the idea of the innocent eye, can art be appreciated? You have to have this innocent eye, and the ultimate innocent eye is, of course, a cow, because a cow doesn't know art history, doesn't have any of these things, and it's being shown a painting of other cows to gauge its opinion. And then you have people in lab coats over here, people engaged. I love how you got a guy with a mop, because if you have a cow, you're going to have messes. It's kind of funny. And these are actually, all of these figures are taken from various historical photos. Some of them he paints in historical figures as well to comment on this nature of art criticism. Again, it's deconstructing art criticism. This is one of my favorite all-time paintings in the world, and I've already shown it to you when I talked about the New York School, because I just think it's a great way. But this is his deconstruction of mid-century art history. So this is the triumph of the New York School, and here he has a collection of individuals. On one side, we have the great artists of early modernism. So you can recognize Matisse is right there, Picasso is right there. These figures are dressed in the uniforms of World War I, and they're riding horses. And then on the other side, we have the modernists of the other side. So in this case, you have Jackson Pollock, you have Robert Motherwell, you have very famous artists from the New York School. In fact, this is Clement Greenberg himself right here. And notice they're not riding horses, they're riding, machine, artillery. They're riding around in armored vehicles, and they are signing a peace accord. And this is the triumph of the New York School. Of course, the whole scene with its battle landscape is borrowed from the Surrender at Breda, a very famous painting, a historical painting by Diego Velázquez, the Spanish Baroque period. So all of this is coming together to create a fascinating image. Not entirely certain how I erase things. We're still working this out. I hope this works. And so what's really fun about all this is, what he's saying is that the old modernists, the modernists of Picasso and Matisse, are outdated, and they have given way to the new modernists of Clement Greenberg's, aesthetic vision. And they're represented. Well, of course, it's absurd. Art movements don't surrender to one to the other. And it's a kind of a play on the idea that this could even happen. It's a kind of joke. Again, a deconstruction. One of my favorite. This is Action Painting 2. So Harold Rosenberg was a very famous critic, and he was the person who invented the term action painting. And he had created the term specifically to describe art of the mid-20th century, this abstract expressionist art, the gestural styles of de Kooning, Klein, Robert Motherwell, and of course Jackson Pollock, that it was action painting, it was capturing action. So Mark Tansey comes along and he turns that whole idea on its head by having people paint action. And so you have people here trying to paint and capture the launch of the space shuttle, the Columbia space shuttle, which is of course patently absurd. You can't do that. You can't. This happens in a matter of seconds and then it's gone. There's no way to capture it. So to see them here literally painting action, is a parody of this idea of action. It's him deconstructing the whole idea of action. This is another one I've shown you before, but I'm just going to go over it again. This is the myth of depth. So here in the myth of depth, we have Clement Greenberg. So Clement Greenberg is right here. Robert Motherwell is here. Arshile Gorky is here holding on to a life ring. This is, I think, Barnett Newman right here. And all of these are figures of the New York school in a boat. And Clement Greenberg is pointing and saying, see, Jackson Pollock will show you the way. So Jackson Pollock is walking on the water like Jesus Christ. And his hand is even outstretched in the traditional gesture he did when he did his drip paintings. So again, the idea here is Clement Greenberg, one of his big things was that paintings are surfaces, that they're not illusions, and that there is no such thing as depth. The painting is a flat surface, and so you should just treat it as a flat surface. And so here is Jackson Pollock revealing to everyone, all these other painters, that see, there is no depth, there is only surface. And he does it by walking on the water. And of course, Clement Greenberg loved Jackson Pollock. He idolized him. He made him the hero of his writings, in much in the same way that Vasari made Michelangelo the hero of his writings when he wrote the La Vitae, the Lives of the Artists. I love how some of these people are looking into the water dubiously. And of course, there's two meanings on this. Of course, the other meaning on this is that there's two terms of depth. One is the illusion of depth in a painting. And so he's clearly saying, well, that the illusion of depth is a myth. But there's also the myth of depth of the abstract expressionists, that this is a postmodernist saying we held up these abstract expressionists as these great geniuses when maybe they were just guys flinging paint on a wall. so I mean, this is really cheeky. I mean, this deconstructs all of these greats, and does it in a very fun way. And by doing it in a monochromatic style, makes it look like an archival photograph or picture or painting. This is a brief history of modernist painting. I love this. Oh my gosh, this cracks me up. That this is his take on how people imagined modernist painting. That throughout the history of the early 20th century, there were different ways of conceiving what is a painting. And of course, some people conceived of a painting as a mirror, as a reflection of reality. So you have a chicken looking at a mirror. Others conceived it as a wall, as a surface. So you have this guy literally beating his head against a wall. And of course, some people conceived of it as a window looking out onto something. And so here's a person washing a window. And so this is Mark Tansey's way of saying all of these ways of conceiving of paintings were kind of pretentious and a bit absurd. And these are deconstructions of them. This one I absolutely love. This one is based on a combination of historical photos. It draws on the paintings of C.M. Russell and Frederick Remington. Frederick Remington and C.M. Russell, of course, the great Western painters of the American West. And this is specifically a kind of parody of a series of paintings done by Remington, which was about the arrival of the white men. And it has these Indians looking out on the horizon, puzzled at these strange new strangers who are coming into their territory. But what I love about this is, instead of the arrival of the white men, this is the arrival of Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson. So, he places this in a historical context to show how this could be absurd. Again, a deconstruction of land art. Nothing was beyond Mark Tansey's wit. This one is hilarious. This one shows a figure who's stumbling to get keys. The implication is that these two people are on a date, and he is trying to take her back to see her etchings, to see the etchings, you know what I mean? But he can't, because he can't find the key to unlock it, and the gates themselves are, in fact, the gates to paradise. These very famous gates done by Ghiberti to the door, the baptistry door. And then, of course, we have images that reference the expulsion of the garden, meaning a cherubim and a flaming sword and a serpent. So we have a guy at the end of a long day and a date just trying to, get lucky, and he can't, because he can't get through art history. He can't find the right key. So, I mean, it's a way of talking about art history as a barrier, and you can't get past the past. It's really funny. Which brings us to probably one of the most controversial characters in postmodernism. That's going to be Jeff Koons. But I think we're over time. I think we're going to stop it there, and we'll break the Jeff Koons off into a different section. All right. Hopefully this worked. Again, I appreciate your patience with me. This is very, very rough. I know it's very rough, but this is the best we can do. Of course, hope that you're all washing your hands and that you're doing your best to avoid anybody who might have a compromised immune system and anyone who's elderly. I know that I appreciate this, even though this is a huge hassle. I have a child who has CAH, which means we have to control our cortisol levels. I also have 2 parents who are over 82, and I've decided not to go visit them for this. So while this seems like it's an overreaction, it really isn't. We're not really doing this for us. We're doing this for the most vulnerable in our society, and so we will soldier on for their sake. And trying to figure out a new technology and trying to do this online, I'm hoping it will work for us, and that's why we're doing it. We'll come back. We'll talk about Jeff Koons. We'll go through Jeff Koons and a couple other artists, and then I'm going to go back to postmodernist feminism. I skipped that when we were talking about feminism because I said I would rather do it here, and I'm glad I did. I think it'll fit in better here. So again, we'll have more details coming forth on how we're going to do your presentations. Your lectures are going to come up first, and hopefully this will be all ready for you to go on 10 a.m. on Monday. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.